sun though, that's good. We have quite a group here to present to you, and a lot of people to answer questions. So I'm going to start with introductions. I'm Linda Dwight, the Superintendent of Schools here in Harvard. Happy to be the chair of the School Building Committee, and I am fortunate to work with a great team of people that have come together over the last couple of years to really think about what was best for Harvard, think about what's best for the future students who will come to school here, and we hope present to you a very viable, best option for moving forward. But again, let's start with introductions. I'm going to just pass the mic around to people who are involved in the project so you get a sense. But if you are involved in any way, either as a teacher liaison, an architect, OPM, building committee, can you stand? And then I'll carry the mic around to you. I'll start with David, trying to hide over here.
I'm David Fay. I've lived in Harvard for 32 years. I'm also a member of the Harvard Energy Advisory Committee, which is why I joined this group.
Thanks, David. I'm Mary Traphagen. I'm a member of the school committee chair, and lived in Harvard for 13 years. 4 children going through public school system. I believe in this project, and I'm you too, and I'm glad to serve on the school building.
I'm Tom Murphy. I'm with NB5, the owner's project manager.
Alice Valeska, I'm the Board of Selectmen representative on the building committee, and I also sit on the capital investment committee, and previously I was on the finance committee for 4 years, and was chair of that. I've lived in Harvard almost 20 years with our family, and our kids went through all the schools here, so we care deeply about the community and schools.
My name is Ron Osberg. I'm on the building committee. I'm an architect. I was co-chair of the Brownfield Building Committee and ran the municipal building study. We lived here for 33 years, and my first town meeting, actually, we looked at the facade going in when we voted on that building. And also on the charter commission for
Larry Stein from Arrow Street. We are the architects working with the community. We're pleased to be here and hope we can answer questions during the course of the meeting.
Thank you, Larry. My name is Ian Morissette. I'm a project architect with Arrow Street, and I'm happy to be here to answer any questions that you have.
My name is Dawn Marie Ailes. I am a 3rd grade teacher at AGS, and I'm just here to be helpful.
And one more. So you can see we've got a full team here today.
Hi, I'm Melissa Carana. I'm a special education teacher at AGS. I'm also on the building liaison for the building committee, and I've been in town for 14 years and have 3 kids at Brownfield.
Thank you very much. So the format for tonight is for us to give a little bit of a background of the project, understanding that people in the audience are at different places in their knowledge about the project and maybe their understanding. After a short presentation, then we'll open it. The majority of the time tonight is really for questions and answers. So we do have some postcards and pens. I think, Mary, you've got them. And can give them out to people if you want to be thinking about your questions as you're listening. And if you just keep those questions in your head or write them down, you can either come to the mic and ask them. The mic helps the viewing audience to hear the question, or we can read it for you and then try to answer it. This is being recorded by cable. It looks like it's also being recorded by the Yes to HES group. And so we'll get started. So we've had 3 goals really working on this project as we've gone along. Probably the most important goal has always been to continue to provide a high-quality learning environment for our students. Most people really value the schools in Harvard, whether you have children in the school system or you don't. We're still in the business of education. Another one is to provide a solution that was cost-effective and met the needs of the district. And lastly, we've really attempted to involve the community. We've tried to have a lot of public forums. We've had tours of the building. We're also willing to do those things off-cycle. If you want to go through the building, the current elementary school, or you have questions, we will at any point take those from community members. So one of the handouts that's out on the table where Don Marie's been staying is a timeline, just to give people a sense of sort of how long this has been an issue in Harvard. In 1988, I'll briefly just go through this, the construction of the Hildreth Elementary School, then called Harvard Elementary, was finished. The 1955 section at the back was attached to the 1988 section. In 1998, there were some air quality issues beginning in that 1950s wing, despite the fact that it was renovated. And part of that ended up being attributed to leaking that happened at the joint between the two buildings. Not exactly sure how that's been confirmed, but that was the source at the time that they thought. In 2004, there was a grant submitted to the Mass School Building Authority to get some help with renovating the building. That was not accepted. In 2005, the Board of Health in Harvard became involved and ordered some things to be done in remediation, particularly in that 1950s wing of the building. And they asked for the town to really look to find a solution within the next 10 years for educating students that were in that space. As you can tell, we are past that 10-year preference by them. In 2012, there was a request to fix the K-wing. People have talked on social media about maybe things weren't put forward for some type of fix prior to this year, but there were some attempts. In 2014, there was a study done to better inform the community about the issues in the 50s wing. In 2015, I actually submitted a grant to MSBA using the study as a lot of the background information that was needed. I think that's one of the reasons why the department, the MSBA, accepted us into the grant program. There's usually about 80 to 100 applications, and generally they only fund about 12 to 15 of those each year. So it was quite a coup to be accepted into the program. And we learned of the acceptance in 2016. It actually was during a slowdown point, and it took over a year for us to get from a submission to acceptance into the program. And then last spring, well actually, was it 2 springs ago? We requested the money for the feasibility study. And during the feasibility study phase, we've thought, considered renovation, and then also considered a new building. These are the members of the school building committee. I wanted you to see who they were and what groups they represent. There's also down at the bottom the past members, and those changes in membership had to do with their elected position, and if that elected position changed, then someone else came in their place. And then we have the 5 teacher liaisons. Marisa is one of them. So let's talk a little bit about the proposed new building. So after about a year of really looking at different research of the current building, the members of the school building committee decided 9-1, they had to vote 9-1 to support a new building. And it was not done lightly. If you ever want to watch a really thoughtful meeting, it's in June of 2017 that members of the school building committee really agonizingly report on what they believe is best for the town. And it wasn't taken lightly that they voted to go with a new building. And each one has their own story that they're happy to share with you. if you want to talk with them afterwards. So the aerial view here is of the current elementary school, and not every town is fortunate to have a field right next door and which to build on that's owned by the town, and so it was seen as a great space to put a new building and continue to occupy the current building. Lots of thought was put into the project, done by the consultants, Arrow Street, our architects, and members of the community. They took a walking tour of the path that you can see outlined on the left to really get the idea of how this town is a walkable town, and that the parts and pieces of the town center are connected, and that this school, signified by the green dot on the bottom right, would be a part of that walkability. They also looked at the architecture, the landscape. They not only walked to the pond and to the Hildreth House, but they also drove around the community to see what type of architectural style would best fit for the new building. This picture is an indication of the open spaces that are also greatly respected in town, and a need to continue that idea. Just another view of the same idea. The school, the new proposed school, faces the library. This is another site view of the project. One of the things that the building committee spent a lot of time on was the traffic solution, trying to make the site safer. If we were starting with a new plan, how could we make it better? And so circulation goes around the full site, hoping to get cars off of 111. Parking is also back here, with the idea that we would like to really eliminate the problem of parking here. This has been realigned so that it's a direct crossover between Pond Road and the school site. There's more parking here for parents maybe watching games or playing on the playground with their children. Again, we can get into more details if people have questions about the site. The other thing they paid attention to was elevation changes. And Larry, why don't I let you speak to the elevation changes and how your group thought about those?
Thanks, Linda. And good evening, everybody. So we have been working hard to understand how the building can fit into the community. And as Linda mentioned, we tried to pay attention to the pathway system that is important for the community, the open space, certainly the sense that the building sitting back from the main road, similar to the way the library does, the town hall, and other important buildings around town. And then how does the building itself, the forms of the building, begin to look compared to the historic buildings that are so much an important part of the town of Harvard. So what we looked at there on the right, on the right are some of the existing buildings around town, some of the ones that we admired as we drove around. And the sense was that there's often a datum plane that is set according to the construction. And then to follow the topography, which is often up and down, there's elements of the foundation walls and things that allow that to happen and become part of the character of the place. And so this is a little bit of a diagram trying to represent how that might work with the new school. There is, across the site, although you might look and think it's relatively flat, there's actually a pretty good pitch from the southwest corner here down towards the northeast corner, which we've represented by this green line, and trying to break up the building into pieces so that, again, it begins to sit properly in the landscape, begins to break down the mass of the building and do many of the things that are similar to the way that historic buildings do. Let me just keep going.
Sure.
Okay. So, and this is sort of jump into what we would consider the Most recent studies of the building, I will say that we have finished schematic design. We have a long way to go in the building design, so there's a long way to go, but it gives you an indication of where we are. Currently, the idea of trying to break down the building into a couple of parts to create that courtyard out front, to create landscape spaces that both fit in with the heritage of Harvard, but also provide those kind of teaching spaces that educators would like for the nice days that we think will be here eventually. And then providing fields and things. And so this represents the cafeteria on the top floor above that, trying to keep things low and down, reduce the mass of the building. This is the 4th and 5th grade classroom wings. The K and 1 classrooms are in this part of the building. The 2 and 3 are in this part of the building. And in the middle, really at the heart of the building, is the part that we are excited about, is the opportunity for the media center to pull things together. So we're beginning to, and here we are in the plan. You were standing over here in that view, looking this way. As I mentioned, the cafeteria, the media center at the center. These are the K1 classrooms, support spaces, a new gymnasium towards the rear of the building, putting that to the back to try and reduce the mass of that structure on the landscape. And then the district offices moving out of the Bromfield House in order to create the accessible spaces that are needed to create the sort of office spaces at the front of the building, creating an entrance that faced, if you recall from the site plan, the parking in this area, and doing it in a way that opens up the building so you have through connections and spaces that are used for how education is delivered in today's environment. Go to the next. On the second floor, this is the 4 or 5 classrooms, the 2-3 classrooms, again in separate wings, joined together. This is the upper floor of the gymnasium, the upper floor of the media center, art and music towards the back, some services. So really, again, trying to create a very compact floor plan, but nevertheless have it open and inviting, and also scale to the community.
I want to talk about how the education wings are separated from the community use.
Sure, we can do that. Maybe go back to the, There we go. So again, the idea is the classroom wings, these are neighborhoods that begin to have quality of teaching, so really dedicated to the education in there. The students using various breakout spaces, which are these purple spaces, which are used for pulling students out of class, giving them the extra time, extra space to do work that they may need for whatever they're working on. Creating spaces so that essentially this part of the building can be closed off from the public parts of the building. That the cafeteria with views out to the courtyard and out to the athletic fields can act as a community resource for evening events like this and other activities. The gymnasium is set up with a stage to the back, again, to create a multi-use type of space so that, again, this can be opened for nights and weekend type events, whether it's a performance by the students or an activity by the community. And all of that around the media center, which is really, we're seeing as the hub of the building, and really is a wonderful space for kids to come together and focus on the education priorities.
Excellent. One other thing about the community use is right here in the offices, everything's sort of been strategically laid out, but these conference rooms would also be available for community meetings. So just one more thoughtful space open to this community use here. So one of the things that the architects have done to really help us to become excited about the project is given us some internal views, and real quickly I'll show you just a few of those internal views. So here's as if you were standing by the cafeteria and looking out towards 111. It goes fairly slowly. I won't have you look at all of it, but the idea is to really make an exciting space for the students. And when you can see this in 3D, which you can out at the table, it really does help you to become excited about what's possible for our children. And when I say our children, I mean collectively our children. Here's the front door, right there that faces the library. A lot of natural light coming into the building here. This is the cafeteria with lots of windows helping to bring nature inside the school. And then just to give you a sense of the inside, this is looking down that kindergarten, first grade hallway with light wells that come with natural light from the roof here, bringing light down into this hallway. The colors and the furniture are not already determined, it's just the architect's rendering. Coming up here on the right is going to be where the students would enter the school if they were coming in from the bus lane. And then there's been a lot of talk about the learning stair, which people say, well, what is that? But I'd like to show you because it's really one of the egresses to the second floor. And it's also been creatively designed to help us to gather students in a larger group. One of the things this school doesn't have is an auditorium. And elementary schools tend not to have auditoriums. But this would be an egress up to the second floor. And then in order to provide a meeting space, the architects have just extended that stairway in order to have a space where students could sit and meet with a teacher perhaps, or students presenting down at the floor level, and students to be able to see that presentation. Across from this is a blank wall, which would have a projector for presentations if that was what was happening. You're getting a peek into the open library concept. Again, that's how we've designed it, still using the recommended space for a library, but a lot of it is open shelving. And then there's a classroom space, a smaller space tucked in behind here for instruction. This is looking towards the cafeteria right there. So if you're interested in seeing more of that, you can look at it out in the lobby. But I want to talk now about the finances. So we've spent some time looking at what is this new school, what will some of its features be, but now what will the costs be? So Alice, do you mind coming up? I'll start it off, but Alice is really one of the financial experts. These are the final costs at this point. This one.
All right, so the total project, as it came in from the two estimators that went through all the line item details, is $53.5 million. The MSBA voted, the board voted, and they have given us a maximum grant of about $18.7 million, which leaves the town share of $34.8 million. Within that grant level, it was higher than we originally expected because they did provide it was a 1.5% than what we were anticipating. Unfortunately, the total project cost came in a little higher I shouldn't say we, but the engineers and the designers who did a lot of pre-work found some conditions at the site that required about $2 million more worth of work on the foundations and the site. So that the extra grant money was very welcome news. As a result of some of those higher costs, this $53.5 million number already represents the building committee taking $1.2 million out because there were elements that it would have been a little bit higher by $1.2 million, and the building committee went through several 10 different items to take those costs out. So the funding sources will be by excluded debt, which is the typical process for all large capital items. The initial financing will be a $5.5 million one-year ban. A ban is a bond anticipation note, and this is a temporary financing, basically, that you get before you finally float the full bond. That is anticipated to be at 3% interest. It's a interest-only loan. The plan right now is to only hold that for the year. I want to point out that all of the other projects in town, the process that has been done is the ban has been carried all the way through construction, and then when the building is finally done, that's when it's bonded, when all the final costs are in place. The building committee and the town finance group and the finance committee and the capital committee all looked at this and have collectively decided that there's enough contingencies and the will and the purpose to keep the building within the budget to allow the town to bond the project early. So we will only hold the ban for 1 year and we'll basically bond it after, very shortly after the bids come in. What does that do for us? And why would we want to do that? During this year, the feds have already announced there will be 3 interest rate hikes, maybe 4. They've already done 1 of them. Next year, the plan is that there will be 2 more. So we are in an increasing interest rate environment, which we have not been in for quite some time. And on a bond of this size, it makes a big difference in the amount of interest that we have to pay. So the earlier it's bonded, the better. So the final financing is expected to be in place in July of 2019. It will be a 25-year bond. Again, in fact, all of the other bonds that we have done in town have been 20 years. And school projects are now done pretty much with 25-year bonds. We're expecting a 4.25% interest. Worked with our bond council. And because of the timing, they looked at all the interest rate hikes and said that that's what we could get. Originally, when you first heard estimates for this project, it was using a 5% interest rate, which made the cost to the taxpayers much higher than what it is now. And the reason for that was because it was expected to be bonded much later in the process. So that's, everyone has worked together really well to come to this point. In addition, the capital committee voted or recommended that there be $1 million in funds out of the capital fund, which has a sizable balance at this point, to be used over the first 5 years of debt service. Because there's another chunk of town debt that's going to come off the books in FY26. So it leaves a 5-year gap when the taxes would be higher for those 5 years. So that will be used to help offset tax payments for all the taxpayers. Similarly, the school committee did the same thing. They voted to take $1 million in funds out of the debits fund on an annual basis for those first 5 years. Questions on anything before I move on? So what is the tax impact of the debt? All of these comparisons are to this year's tax, so that you can formulate for yourself what it means to your tax bill. And in FY21, which is 3 years from now, that would be the maximum increase for the Harvard taxpayers. If you do not include that funding from the capital fund and Devon's fund, it would be a 13% increase. Remember, originally we thought this would be a 16% increase, so it would be a 13% increase. With the addition of those funds, it brings it down to an 11% increase, which is still, unfortunately, much higher than any of us would prefer. However, that's the current makeup of the town, in that the residential properties form the bulk of the tax base. And so therefore, it's not spread across commercial as in some other towns who may be looking at similar projects. As I mentioned, a large tranche of debt is paid off in FY26. This is one of the other school projects that was done. And so by the time you get to FY26, so 5 years into the bond, the median taxpayer, their increase is down to $787 per year. So the peak was $1,062, dropping to $787. Questions at all on any of that? The other concern that we all have is this going to preclude the town from doing any other capital projects? Because we have quite a few that are on the capital schedule that are going to need debt funding. And what we looked at then was modeling. If we take every single one of those projects at the amount they have listed right now with the expected interest rate, what would the debt service be and what would the tax impact be, assuming every single one of those is passed? And what that does is the peak of the tax increase is then just under 13% in FY23, and then it drops down to a little over 11% and then declines every year after that. And this includes the addition to Hilbert House, it includes 2 fire engines, it includes new work on the DPW building, and the other section of long-term projects that would be covered out of other funds instead of debt is the other roads projects, which Capital Committee assessed that there was enough money to be able to cover that as well, instead of making that into excluded debt. Simultaneously, the Capital Committee looked at all of the smaller capital requests that are not funded by debt to make sure that those could also be funded as expected out of the capital fund, and for everything that's on the schedule over the next 5 years, which includes some significant renovations and replacement of parts and pieces of brownfield, which are needed. All of those can also be paid for through the capital fund and through additional money from the Devens Fund, which is allocated on an annual basis to capital projects. Any questions at all on that piece of it? Yes?
All right, does the capital fund and Devon's money need to be approved at town meeting, or does somebody else approve that?
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm like basic level here.
Yeah, the capital fund the money that comes out of that has to be approved every year on an annual basis. So that at this point, what we've done is a recommendation, and then every year, the amount that, it's about $400,000 each year that comes out. 200,000 from capital and 200,000 from the Devens Fund. And each of those amounts would need to be voted. Capital by town meeting. The Devens Fund is voted by the school committee. So that does not go to town meeting because they have control over those funds.
Thanks, Alice. And just because Alice is going away from the front doesn't mean you can't ask more money questions. She's great at that. We have like 3 slides left. This one is just talking about the timeline. If the new school is proposed already and does pass at the town meeting and the ballot, then construction wouldn't actually happen until this time next year, because as Larry said, a lot of detailing still needs to be done in order to send bid packages out, and that would be done in the next year. Construction would be about 3 years, from 19 to 21 when everything would be finished. People have asked whether the fields and the final finished look is included in the costs, and it is. So in 2021, that would be what you've seen in some of the renderings. Just to give you a sense, we also know that it's possible this won't pass, and if it does not pass, then there would be a plan put into place of what to do next. But we would have to go back through the cycle for MSBA if it was going to be a renovation project. The important part to note about that is not so much as a scare tactic, but as a understanding that it takes time to get back into the program. So where we've completed these steps already at the top row, such as submitting a grant and getting their decision and doing the feasibility study and getting the plans approved, that would start over again. And the first time that you can submit to MSBA again is in April of 2019. So that would begin the submission. It takes about a year almost to find out if we've been approved. And then if we were approved, we would have to come to the town for another feasibility study. This feasibility study is not reimbursed. The current one that we're doing is at the percentage of the project cost. So then we would be delayed with construction starting when the school would already be finished if we were moving ahead as it's proposed. So that's just to get a sense of the timeline difference. And I think,
Linda,
whoops, sorry.
isn't it appropriate to also point out that that's based on an assumption?
It is.
And that assumption is that SBA will put us directly back into that queue. And the information that exists.
Wait 1 second, Ron. You're making a good point, but they can't hear you unless you say it into this.
I don't like to say that we'll sneak over and cut the cable unless you use the microphone,
I'm getting visual signals back there.
but we might pick at your house.
That's it. What I was saying is that Linda's diagram is based on the assumption that you go back into the queue in an orderly fashion. MSBA, as a policy matter, and they've stated it, and it's been quoted in the press, don't see that as a right. You have to go back through it again. They have a lot of competition for that money. The competition is actually getting greater because the money in some cases is getting to be less. The assumption that you see here about when the renovation would be done in 2025, many people would, based on what's happening in other towns, the length of time to get back into the queue, et cetera, that that's an extremely optimistic number. And as you all know from the inflation numbers that are added to construction every year, 2, 3, 4, 5%, Massachusetts is a very healthy economy with regard to construction. Therefore, there's a constant demand that tends to push prices up. So the cost of everything, if delayed for 5 years, is predictably greater. And MSBA has charted all of this. I encourage you to go onto their website. They have done a lot of data collection. I don't know if you realize, Brownfield, when we did the addition, was done under a different set of conditions. The state was not organized the way that they are now. In 2008, they completely reorganized that program. It's extremely rigorous. It's run under the treasurer of the state. They have a lot of data, and they have some very strong procedures. We're the beneficiaries of that, having worked on one prior to the change and now one after the change. It's quite different. We have a partner. The partner is demanding, but the partner comes with a lot of positive things. For example, they demand conditioning on a building, which is not something that we would typically do. Most clients don't do. It's expensive, but they realize that that's critical to the ultimate performance of the building. But I'm going on now, so.
Important. And I think it's a good point to say that MSBA does have an excellent website. And we're not paying them anything. They're a service. And then they use taxpayers' money to fund schools. So that 18.7 million is your money being given back to you, really. And so, again, they're in the business of helping with the projects, really wanting buildings to be sustainable. They don't want what happened here in Harvard to happen again in this town or any other, or their money is ill spent. So we're happy to answer questions. You can see we've got a lot of the experts here. And so don't be shy. You do need to go to the mic or pass us your card if you don't want to speak into the mic, and we'll answer your questions. One thing that wasn't mentioned is we brought a construction manager at risk into the project. Part of that was to help us deal with the sustainability and longevity of the project in the planning. And so we actually have a construction manager working with us as the plans are being developed. And I don't know if Tom, maybe you can speak a minute to that and what that benefits, how that benefits Harvard?
Sure, that's one of the decisions that was made by the building committee throughout the process of whether we went two methodologies of procuring construction in Massachusetts. Chapter 149, which is design, bid, build. You just finish the drawings, it goes out to bid, the low bidder gets the job. Chapter 149 ways CM at risk, where you bring your contractor on, you interview contractors, you bring the one you choose on earlier, and then he works for a set fee. The biggest advantage of that is you get him on early, and as we were discussing cost estimates, the final cost estimate, the check cost estimate was done by that construction manager. So he's in there before we finalize the price, giving his estimate of what the cost is. He has knowledge over the way construction happens that the cost estimator might not have. So he's a good check on the architect's cost estimator. Also, as Linda said, as we're reviewing the longevity of the building and those kind of things, he's part of the team from the beginning. When we start looking at the details of the building, you need to be part of the team going forward as we start looking at construction details, how they go together. So there's a greater assurance that we're not going to have a building at the end with documents with some details that maybe need further coordination, because all that coordination happens up front. So you generally get a more tighter building, and there's a lot of risk that's averted by going with that methodology.
I can't imagine you don't have some questions. John, I knew you would come through.
Hi, John Mead here. So I am guilty of being someone who didn't really pay attention to this project until I multiplied my tax bill times 16%. So I apologize for that, and I really do appreciate the work of the building committee in taking a lot of time, putting your heart and soul into this. And I think the building you come up with is beautiful, right? I've got a sticking point in my head though. So I've tried to read through all the documents, and I'm still stuck on this idea that it looked like there was a clustering of pricing for really expensive options, right? In that like $30-ish million range, which feels viscerally to me like marketing pricing, right? Like, oh, if you just want that little, the LX package is 5% more, and the LXI package is just a little bit more than that. And as I poured through everything, and I think there was an article just today in the Post that really talks about what feels like is missing from this conversation is an understanding of what would have been the absolute bare bones MSB reimbursable option that didn't move any walls, right? That really just tried to tailor and minimize everything to the absolute most pragmatic option, right? So I'm just curious in the perspective. It feels like we don't know what that number is, and it seems to me like that the question for people who are hesitant to vote yes on this is, are we going to punish the building committee for not surfacing that data, right, in the hopes that we are so pragmatic that we can make up for it, or can we understand? So that's where my head's at, thanks.
Anyone want to take that one? Thank you, Ron.
I'm glad you asked that. I spent a lot of time in the newspaper today. I made some notes. One of the things I want to say, having been involved in school projects here a bit, is that I think we need to question the question. Is our goal to produce the cheapest form of renovation? Is that what we're here for? Let's say we do produce the cheapest form of renovation. How long do you think it's going to last? And then what do you do? The MSBA charges us, as their granting authority, to say that we're doing something that will last 50 years. So as we're looking at what the scope of the renovation would be, we run into the following. Number one, there are a series of codes. Some of them are obvious. You can quickly price them. They have to do with fire protection and life safety. And they're upgrades in and of themselves. When we did Brownfield, we did not have the requirement of doing sprinklers, as Peter Warren, then chief, reminded me. But in this case, we have to do a lot of things. Seismic has also changed. For example, all those concrete block walls that are sitting in the corridor are doing this in an earthquake. And we're a very heavy, actually, seismic zone. We've been very blessed not to have it hit us, but it exists. So those have to be tied up. So there are a number of code things, not only life safety things, which are demanded, but also accessibility. There's a lot of talk about bathrooms and when they were renovated and so on and so forth. But we have a lot of door width issues, and you can't turn wheelchairs around in the rooms and so on and so forth. These are serious things, they add up. The other thing, the second thing that struck us as we were going through this is there are a lot of worn out systems in the building. And I will say, to the credit of the building, one of the worn out systems, the mechanical system that lasted 33 years, that's actually not so bad for the mechanical system. It's an antiquated system, a through wall thing, which was invented at a time to reduce costs. And it reduced costs in first cost because there's not any ductwork with it, which, by the way, keeps the air quality really miserable. But it was also supposedly going to be lower cost because all of those motors could be easily changed. You just go ahead and change them. What they didn't realize was that there were hundreds and hundreds of these motors, and we could have the teachers talk to the equipment that they use, scissors and screwdrivers and so on and so forth, to keep these things running. So it was clear to us that we had to change out worn out systems. You change the mechanical system, you're going to change it from a through-wall system to an air circulating system. The floor-to-floor dimensions in that building do not easily support the movement of ductwork. Probably get it in there, but it's not easy, so therefore it'll be a little more expensive. So you put that ductwork in, you're also going to deal with the ceilings, because you also have the sprinklers that you have to deal with up at that level. So worn out systems is a serious thing. Take the windows, for example. Mark changes out a certain number of windows every year. And he does that because the seal goes around the outside. It's pretty normal. It's actually 33-year-old windows. It's not so bad. But if you're going to do a good renovation, you change them out once and for all. So you change all the light bulbs one at a time. The other thing about the windows is asbestos around the edge. The car, not unusual for that time in construction. So you've got codes, you've got worn out systems, and then you've got MSBA saying to you, if you want our grant, you also have to do some educational upgrades. You have to show us that this is getting you a better performing building from that. So we looked at those, and we realized that they were adding up to a fair amount of money. And you had a mechanical system that kind of migrates to an electrical system. That raises lots of questions about lighting. You have the most efficient kind that you should be using at this point in time. And we asked ourselves, if we did those things, would we have a good renovation? Would we even remotely come close to meeting MSBA's requirement for a 50-year building? The answer was pretty much no. So let me give you 4 other negative aspects of the minimum renovation that people are looking for. In a minimum renovation, you still have to pay for staging. In other words, you have to take the people out of the building. We didn't believe, Tom didn't believe, the architects didn't believe that it was really viable to attack all of those things and leave the kids in the building. That gets to be a really awkward, expensive, let's say not say dangerous because the contractors are smart enough to handle it, but it's pretty messy. So you have to move at least some of the kids out. So you've got problems of the distance to cafeterias and gyms, supporting spaces, and so on. So there's a cost of intervention there by moving people into another area. Second, we ask the question, is the envelope even remotely close to 50 years? Because in our estimate, we didn't do anything to the envelope. Why? Well, the roof, when I say envelope, I mean the roof structure, the gutters and downspouts on the wall, not a well-insulated wall, not a terribly well-constructed wall, a form of steel stud construction, which was subsequently much maligned in the profession. A lot of thermal bridging, blowing cold from the outside to the inside, and these certainly these through-wall ventilating systems were part of that, but that wasn't the only problem. So even if we did this minimum thing, the envelope was pretty bad. When we changed the gutters, we changed the roofing, we changed out the windows, we hadn't solved the insulation problem, and we really hadn't solved the long-term durability of the building. If you notice around the downspouts where it comes down, and you'll see this porous block, and a rough block, alternates with the brick, it's absorbing a lot of moisture. Terrible material, actually, for that location. Third, site issues. When's the last time you came around the corner, Mass Ave, at 3:15 or 2:45, what is it? It's right in there. And the cars are all back there. So, what we did in this minimum renovation is absolutely nothing with regard to the site. And the site is a problem. I know I drive up Pond Road. So we drive up Pond Road, you come up, you can't see in both directions, the cars are piled up. There's not enough parking spaces. So we didn't really do anything to improve the site. And we didn't do much of anything other than the minimum that MSBA instructed approved the project for taking advantage of the kinds of things that Linda has shown here that really show a progressive, having the building progress at the rate that our pedagogy is progressing. So then we said, well, we don't want to do a minimum thing. That doesn't make any sense. It's not a good project. It makes no sense for this town. It's not economical in the long run. So we didn't really, we tried to price a good renovation. It isn't a 50-year renovation, but one that we thought would be reasonable. We didn't like it terribly. I mean, it didn't do what should happen for education. It didn't do what should be done for the building performance and longevity. It did not increase the size of the gym, which is too small. It did not remedy the situation with the cafeteria, which is too small and awkward, and so on and so forth. So that's, I'm trying to give you a sense of kind of the progress, the process of thinking this through, which took place over a long period of time. Anything Joe chronicled in the newspaper today was that it took a long time. That part I agree with her on anyway. So that's my take on it. Maybe my friends would like to add to that. I guess I've been storing up this monologue for a while. Or maybe you all would like to ask more questions first.
Yeah, I think Ron described really well qualitatively how we progressed through this, and honestly, we know people are busy, we don't have time to pay attention, at a level of detail, and so when all of a sudden, 3 or 4 months before you're going to vote, that's when you really kick in and start looking at the information, and we're just trying to make sure that everybody gets some flavor of the long process and the thought that went into this. Along with all of that progression of starting with a very basic renovation and moving up, we had multiple cost estimates along the way. The analysis that appears in today's paper is literally at the end stage, where you're looking at renovations in the document that was sent to the MSBA supporting the new construction choice. So the new construction choice has had a lot of detailed work on it. The other renovation options have not. And so that's why in some cases, what you see and what Joan picked up on in her looking at all of the bids or the quotes in the estimate is, here's a level of quality. You know, the school building committee, none of us could stand up in front of the town and say, yes, we're going to spend 25 million, or we're going to spend 27 million, or we're going to spend any number of millions to renovate that building and only have it last 15 or 20 years. Because what Ron was describing in a minimal, if you only do a minimal, you will be coming back if you just repair some of those heating units and you don't replace the whole thing. Or you just do some of the work on the windows and you don't replace them. Then 10 years, 15 years, you're going to have to do another major chunk of work and another major bit of disruption. So that's why when you get to the quality of a renovation where it needs to last 30 years, you know, we didn't have the architects design something that would last 50. The new building has to be to those standards. The renovation, we said, that has to be to 30-year standards. And that's what they did for us. And so when you look at those cost estimates, some of the things, yes, the HVAC, you're going to use the same cost on a square foot basis because we wanted the same quality of HVAC system in a renovation, because we wanted to have a modern, efficient, really good system that you know, transports outside air in and out so that it's a really healthy, good environment for everybody in that building. And so you price it out on a square foot level. Same thing with, you know, with electricity to support that. The parts of the building that you could say, oh, save money on the furnishings or save money. Yes, you could. Those are honestly not as much in the grand scheme of things in terms of the cost. But I think what we have right now is you have a very, very good idea of what a really, really good high-quality renovation would do. Because we had so many people that came and talked to us, they answered on the survey, we got reams of comments. What are you doing to make sure this never happens again? And that was one of the things that we really held front and center. We did not want to have, okay, 25 years and now you need another major project, you know, on the same building. Does that answer part of your question?
Yeah, please do, John. And while you're coming to the mic, you can please do come. Am I correct, Tom, in saying that on those renovation schemes, we took a price per square footage about renovation? Because I know we didn't get detailed in the cost like we did for a new building. And so wasn't it a renovation cost per square foot, and then we had the K-wing as new build by square footage, and then the renovation at a professionally estimated renovation cost for the rest of the building? Is that true?
Yeah, that's correct. As the drawings get more and more detailed, you have more to estimate. So at the very beginning concept phases, we didn't even have plans that we were looking at. We were just looking at square footage and kind of mixing, and then the cost estimators just come up with current cost per square foot. So they're making some assumptions as to what is in the renovation and what is in a new building. But as we vet that renovation cost that Ron alluded to, as we get more and more into detail, find out, no, we need to replace this, we need to replace this component. They get more detailed, and the cost estimate for the square foot cost goes up and up a little bit on the renovation side. One thing also that I'd like to add is people touched on a lot of things about the durability, and Ron touched on it a bit, but the big thing that you see now, you see these images up here. They're great images. They're very different classrooms than the classrooms that you and I went to school, probably. And these are not really extravagant. This is the way to build schools nowadays. Children are taught today in a much different manner than they were 20 years ago. And the MSB has a process, and the first thing we submit to them, in the very first submission that becomes the guidepost throughout the whole process it's called the Ed Plan. And it says, how do you teach your children here in Harvard? And there's Linda or someone else can talk more about how they do that teaching, but there's a lot of breakout spaces. They aren't cells anymore, classrooms. Individual teachers, they pull children out in little study groups, project-based learning, and the walls of the classroom have spaces between them that education can happen. And when you're doing a renovation, that's hard to do in the existing building. The existing building has cells, and when you start looking at applying that renovation to the Ed Plan, which is the goal for the project, that's when the renovation gets more. You have to start breaking down walls and making these breakout spaces, and that gets more expensive because now you're taking walls down, and then you hit triggers of other things. So that's where the renovation costs began. As you get into detail more and more, it creeps up the more closer to new construction.
I feel like I broke a logjam of stuff based on the news article today, so thanks everybody. But I do still have a question. Let me try to put it more crisply. So I recently got an estimate to get those mini split units because I have a really old house and it's getting really crappy. And it came in, I could get like an industry loan, it came in like $8,500, right? And I could get an energy save loan, right, with preferred interest. But then I was like, I'm getting like 8,000 BTUs worth of cooling. And I can do that for a $250 window rather, air conditioning, right? And I don't want that, it's going to look ugly in the window, but there's a piece of data that I don't have, right, that I would like to have, which is what is the opportunity cost of doing this construction. I understand that everyone on the building committee, in good faith, does not believe it's the level of quality that we deserve, does not provide the educational experience that we would like to have for the students. Like, I get it, and I think that's in good faith. What I don't think we're armed with is the information of what is that opportunity cost. If we did decide to be super pragmatic, way more pragmatic than we'd like to be, what would it cost to do a facelift of the building to decide that a hot water loop is still okay, even though we like forced hot air and everyone agrees it's better air quality? What I still haven't heard is how much would that actually cost? So that's my question.
Yeah. We didn't go down that road, so I don't have a good answer. Alice?
I have a question for you. What would you use it for? You're suggesting it's an opportunity cost, that therefore the savings is an opportunity to do something else. Tell me what you would do with it.
Well, you answer my question first.
Does anybody have an idea?
We've got an opportunity cost.
Larry does.
We would need to be looking at, that's what I'm trying to describe. To do that, then you have to look at what you're going to apply the money to, the savings to. And that's not part of our scope. Our scope is to build a building that's the best building in terms of durability, performance, and education, and a seat for the mission of this educational institution to thrive. And buildings are part of that. They're not certainly all of them. So we looked at it in terms of what can the building do for, bail me out.
Let's see if Alice does that.
I think the only reason I've come up, Linda, is I think it's possible that the batteries have died in that wire. Because I've been fiddling with it back there, and I can't seem to get any more volume if Ron was way out here versus right up here. It just didn't seem to want to play. So, but rely on that one and this one. That's just fine.
Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, I was just talking with...
Give John a number.
Yeah, I'm going to know. I'm going to try to say what the number is and what it isn't.
Okay, give him a number.
So part of the project, Tom and the team at NV5 had to come up with an estimate of what it would cost literally to do just the code repairs. And you have to understand when you do all the code repairs, all the code upgrades, the sprinklers, the ADA, the structural stuff, you're gonna disrupt a lot of the walls, you're gonna open up ceilings, so you are gonna have to do surface work as well. The code repairs, they estimated, and again, broad brush estimate, not line by line, it's about $20 million. Looking at square foot, cost per square foot to do the type of work that needed to be done to bring that building up to code. That does not fix the roof. That does not do anything to the size of any rooms. It doesn't it doesn't meet any of the ed plan, which is a requirement.
Does it replace the cable? Yeah.
Yes, because that had to be done.
So 20.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's,
And you
yeah.
probably would not get MSBA funding.
Yeah, it's interesting because they require that as part of the process, which I'm sure is very confusing to people, because why would they require it if they won't pay for it? Their core goal is getting buildings that last and buildings that meet ed plans, and that code upgrade does not meet their requirements. So you have to do more than that to get the MSBA.
Say one thing also, Alex, about the visits to the other schools.
Yeah.
Before you do that, can I ask one question?
Sure.
20 million, you said that doesn't fix the roof?
No,
Like, at all?
at all, no.
So it'd be just the same that that's right now?
Right, because the roof is not a code issue.
Right, this is just code.
That's just code.
No issue.
It does not fix the roof, it doesn't fix any of the windows, it doesn't fix the exterior envelope, which is prone to moisture. It does not, the only thing it fixes is the seismic issues, because that is code.
This is basically like the legally minimum that we can do.
I want to try to clarify a little more what you did. You asked about opportunity costs. This
I think
might,
that's not the answer, right? Like that, just to be clear, like I'm asking if we know what it would cost to have the minimum option that would have qualified for MSBA reimbursement. And I understand that that is not a comfortable question to answer because that's going to trigger a follow-up question, well, what if we just go back to that? But that's really what I'm trying to
okay, so I would say there's a corollary question that needs to be answered at the same time. What's the liability cost? Liability cost, in my estimation, is extremely high for the town. The town is managing capital assets. It has a few buildings. It's some roads, it's some infrastructure. As a town, we're not very sophisticated actually in handling our infrastructure. We have problems with facilities maintenance and so on. We're spread out over 25 square miles. We're not really sophisticated in that level. So you have to be pretty careful about where you make your investments, how you look at the saga, the melodramas of town hall, the front door of the library, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're not really sharp in this area. So the more you kind of put off, and remember, this creation is a result of having put off the reconstruction of the K-wing when the other building was built. So we have a little tradition of not taking down things when they're ready to come down. So we incur liability costs as a result of this approach of the minimum. And so just keep that in mind. When you're asking what the opportunity cost is, I would argue there's also a liability cost from a town asset standpoint.
And John, the school building committee, when it put forward the 28 something, was the minimal that we felt we could put ourselves behind. And that does include the educational improvements of creating some smaller spaces. But I believe the educational improvements came in at about 4 million of that cost. So anyway, but what people are trying to do is go back to those numbers and get more detail than was ever actually created on those options because they weren't taken through the next year. And that's a difficult thing for us to get tangled into, which is why I think the article in the paper is very confusing. Because it tries to equate the length of time that we've spent detailing a new building with what was our decision point back a year ago. Well, those weren't detailed. They were on an average of the square footage. And so the chart I find completely invalid because it tries to put the same level of detail across all the options, and we never took those options to that point. So, you know, our committee was charged with making a decision for all the liability reasons that Ron mentions and all of the unknowns. We felt the best thing that Harvard students could get would be a new building. People could disagree with that, and that's what the vote is all about, is you can disagree. And then another committee will have to come up with the next plan that they think will pass in this town for building. But I'll tell you, it'll be a hard situation because you'll be trying to piece together a building that we've already discovered has a lot of issues. And so that's where we stand, and that's the committee's recommendation, but everybody can have a different opinion. So you won't find the level of detail you're looking for probably, John, unless someone goes back and spends a year detailing the renovation. That's the reason nobody can answer you this correctly.
Thank you. And I would probably put it towards like half a trip to the Caribbean at this point. That's it.
After the snow this morning?
John, I did want to say that the level of information, the budget numbers or the projection numbers that the building committee was looking at when they made the decision of what option to go forward with, it was, you can look at them, they're from a May meeting of the building committee, May 2017. Yeah, there's blue spreadsheets. It's not, we did not make our decision on all of the stuff that was in the PSR, which is the document that was detailed in the paper today. At the time we made the decision, I honestly can't remember off the top of my head what the total project amounts were, but the lowest level, option 1, which fixed everything, fixed the roof, didn't do too much. It was a little over, it was like $25.5 million to the town. The highest level of renovation was, oh, thank you. Well, because this was, it was alternate 1. It was $25.3 million to the town. It was a total project of $40 million. And the highest level of renovation was $30.8 million to the town. And these are the numbers that we made our decision on. That was where our value base.
Yeah, there's an error in the first line. The error is that there's no MSBA reimbursement, so it shouldn't say 13.5. And we caught that later.
Yeah, because that's where the new wing with the code, that's the 22 million. That's the best estimate we've had for just the code work. It's 2022, again, because that isn't super detailed. So when we looked at that and we looked at the projected tax impact, even the lowest level of renovation, which doesn't solve a lot of the educational issues with the building, was going to increase taxes by a little over $1,000. And then we had to look at that. Are we going to ask people to spend that much money and still have a building that doesn't meet what other towns have today? That was a real eye-opener. You asked me to talk about our tours of other schools. I really wish I could have brought everybody in town on those, because I was absolutely amazed at the schools in other towns. And these are not brand new schools. Some of these are schools that were built 8 years ago or 9 or 10 years ago, and they are still so much more functional than the way that elementary school is designed. They're much more, and it's not just about, part of it is being open and airy and welcoming, and no, that is not super expensive. It's just open and airy. It's just having more light coming in. But it's just the functionality, how the kids can interact. It was a huge difference. I'll tell a personal story, if you don't mind. I'll take 2 seconds, because we lived in Pepperell before we moved over here. And, oh gosh, sorry. And we moved over in 1999, and I knew that the elementary school was, about 10 years old, so I hadn't seen it. And our daughter was in the elementary school over in Pepperell, and it had a new addition sort of added on about 6 5 or 6 years after this building was built. And it was beautiful. It was, you know, it was just really nice rooms, lockers, everything. Came over here and I saw the elementary school. This is 99. And I looked at it and I was frankly amazed that in those 5 or 6 years, or maybe it was just the design, that a building could be so different, you know, than the one that we had literally just come from. And the teachers are fabulous, the education is fabulous, but I think that what Josh said the other day in a meeting was, at this point, they're in trying to give every student the personal attention that they need and the best level of education, the building is working against them at this point. So when I looked and we went to 5 or 6 different buildings, and I thought about, you know, telling the town, because I take it my responsibility very personally, that I would have to stand up and say, I either vote for a project or I don't, because I feel that it's the best decision in the long run for the town. Could I vote for a project where I'm looking at it and the basic form and structure of that building would still be there? A renovation would fix it, but that basic form and structure would still be there. It's outdated today, and we would make it last another 20 years. Can you imagine working within that building 20 years from now when it's outdated today?
There's a letter to the editor from Kate Squire, and she works in one of the schools that we toured, Willard School in Concord, and she talks about the experience of the students and the teachers in that new school. And that school is now, I think, 10 years old, but we went through it, and a lot more natural light and better spaces and just a healthier environment. One of the things few people know is that the rooms currently are heated by univent heaters, which I think Ron mentioned or someone mentioned. If they're on, they're exchanging air from the outside into the building. If they're not on, there is no exchange of air. So the stagnant air that those kids breathe in and out remains the same, which is why schools aren't built like that anymore. They're built with air exchange that happens all the time. Brownfield has air exchange. In fact, air handlers were replaced in order to increase the circulation to current standards in those rooms. There's no air exchange at AGS. Another problem that we ran into in thinking about renovating. Larry, you're dying to say something?
Well, no, just to clarify. One of the things that was, so the MSBA requires us to look at a variety of options, and you saw 4 options. When we submitted the PSR to them in June, they actually asked for a 5th option, which was that code minimum requirement. So in our minimum option 1 that you saw on the list, it was always an assumption that the K-wing would have to come down. And you have heard about issues related to the construction of that and the mold that's been found there, and the memorandum of agreement with the health department. So in our thinking as the architects, that was always a given, was that has to come down. One of the things that Ron alluded to, but was a little bit softly talked about there, was all of the major infrastructure for the building are in that K-wing. The boiler system, the electrical system, etc. So to take that wing down by itself means in one of the options, 2 of the options we looked at, building a new mechanical plant elsewhere in the building and then taking that piece down and then putting that back. So the cost implications were starting to get a lot higher, which is why you saw those numbers creeping towards, as Linda was saying, the cost of new construction. It wasn't just quite as simple as saying, take that one down and build a new one there. We also looked at and tried to give the committee input on the timing of those kind of transformations. As Ron alluded to, and again, I think he understated some of the issues related to timing of phasing of construction. If you think about the K-wing coming down, you think about where you're going to put those kids during that 2-year construction period, 2 years plus or minus. We were looking at putting modular construction trailers, essentially, They're a little better than trailers, but that's what they're known as these days. Out in the field, a certain number of students, let's say half, will be out in the field, learning, coming back and forth to the building during the periods for gymnasium, use of the gym, use of the cafeteria, use of the library, coming back and forth to the school. At the end of that 2-year construction period, when that K-wing was rebuilt, you would then say, okay, we're going to take the kids out of the 1988 section, move them to the modular classrooms. Now let's renovate that piece of the building. So we were looking at roughly 4 to 5 years worth of construction, which if you think about it is oftentimes, well really for some students could be their entire elementary school career at Hillwood. So it's one of the things the committee was really quite concerned about, and there's also issues of, as Linda mentioned, safety, thinking about how the pickup and drop-off and school buses happen in periods when construction is going on. You can imagine it's an increase in complexity, which, as Ron says, yes, we can solve that from a logistics and safety standpoint. The cost goes up. And so you were seeing some of those costs coming into the comparisons in the pieces. And again, that's why those option 1 and option 2, which were on the lower end of the construction, were coming up higher and closer to the upper end. I just wanted to clarify, because I think those are things that is a little harder to think about in the process of thinking about, well, what would I spend on the building is, what is the construction duration, what is the impact on the students and the staff, and how does that add up to the cost of the building. And we did go back on a supplementary submission, you probably see it on the website, at the MSBA request, they asked us to look at just the code upgrades, not including replacement of the K-wing, which again we felt was a given, given what we knew of the situation there.
Other questions?
Excuse me. Would the revisions fix the ice dams that we get in our school roof, and what would it take to actually fix those?
Lee? Want that one? Because I don't think so, but I'm not a construction person.
Thank you. The ice dams are caused by insufficient insulation around the exterior of the building, and because that, correct me if I'm wrong, because that initial estimate of upgrade did not include renovation to the roof and insulation to the exterior, no, that wouldn't actually address the ice dams, which is a major problem, because as we all experience from our houses, if we don't treat the vulnerability of the building to water and the effects that the water has on it, it further deteriorates the integrity of the building. And so that would be something that would not be addressed as a part of that.
Can you describe, Lee, why those ice dams form?
Absolutely. When you have a sloped roof, like most of us do, and there isn't enough insulation in your attic or your roof, and a whole bunch of snow lands on your house as a result of a big storm, the heat inside your house goes up to the highest point in the building and begins to melt the snow on your roof. And then it travels down with gravity to the outside, to the eaves. And when it hits the eave, the part that overhangs on the outside of the house, is cold, because it's cold outside. And that water becomes ice, and it freezes up. And as that ice builds up on your roof eaves, it eventually gets to the point where it begins trapping water behind it. But the place where the water is trapped is actually over your occupied house. And then that gives the opportunity for water to make its way into the building, causing major damage. If anyone here is a few years ago, we had quite a lot of ice and snow in there. Everybody had ice dams, and we saw the damage and repairs we had to go into to fix that for our house. When you have a building that's this large, 75 or 6,000 square feet, that's a lot of work, and it can cause a lot of damage.
How is that going to be fixed in the new?
The new building, well, fundamentally, there's a heck of a lot more insulation on top of the roof. And the second issue is that the steel inside the building is pulled away from the outside of the building, which means the insulation is more continuous around. It's like putting a big puffy coat on as compared to maybe just a vest or some gloves where you've got bits exposed to the cold weather. A big puffy coat or even a sleeping bag that covers you all around, and then there's no cold spots, if that makes sense. And then that opportunity for thaw and refreeze on the edges of the roof just isn't there. And the building itself is designed differently, so there aren't those large overhangs. Because we knew about the vulnerability of this, even with a wonderfully insulated building, if you have big overhangs and occupied spaces inside, it can be a risk. So we've made efforts to simplify the roof forms and address those kind of ice and snow issues.
Larry?
So to be a little more specific, so the upper floor of Hildreth is like this. It's an open cathedral ceiling. There are steel T members that are the roof framing members that are holding up a plank system with a very thin layer of insulation. And so what's happening there is, as Lee was alluding to, the heat from the classrooms is melting the snow, and as it goes down, it then hits the cold roof edges and freezes, and that's what's causing the ice dams around the building. And it's particularly noticeable on the areas where the roof plane changes because you've got the water circulating in those parts. And we did do a study, it's probably in one of the various presentations available on the website, what would happen if you were to try and really re-insulate the entire building. And it really is a dramatic piece of work, essentially taking all of the exterior brick off, putting new insulation on, and putting all the exterior brick back on. And so that would then begin to get us back to, as Lee's alluding, the fully insulated building, and the costs on that go up dramatically.
In fact, we excluded that part of wrapping the building because it was too costly, right? Yeah.
And it begins to affect things like your windows, your doors. In other words, the further out the brick comes, then you have to replace your windows because the windows have to then connect up with the brick, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really quite a cascading series of moves to try and insulate. And as Lee was saying, what is happening, part of the problem is the steel is essentially in the plane of the insulation. So in areas where there's insulation, you have a decent thermal break between the outside and the inside. In areas where there's steel, there is no real insulation connecting. And so what happens is the steel is, as Lee said, a thermal bridge. It is cold in the winter, and then you get moisture condensation and things like that.
Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Just a few clarifications about the K-wing. So it's not just a K-wing. It has 9 classrooms. It's actually has a very big footprint. And my understanding is even if we didn't have the mold problem, MSBA wouldn't reimburse us for renovating it because it has partially wood framing. Is that correct? And also we hear a lot that word undersized for the gym, the cafeteria, and the library. And that's not from us, that's from the MSBA. They believe that those 3 large spaces are undersized for our capacity, our community. It's also special ed and PK, right? PK, right?
Special.
Okay.
What's the third space?
The cafeteria, the gym, the library, and special ed. There's 4.
Oh, that's what we meant.
That's what I sorry. Great questions. Others?
Could you say a little bit about the engineering room or makerspace?
Sure.
What it is and how they're used?
Yep. So one of the spaces that has gotten some attention is actually right above this area. So it's on the 2nd floor, and it's we're calling it an engineering room or lab. And the idea of it is to have all kinds of building materials in it. It'll be a science room where there'll be 3D printers, there'll be tools. It's a little bit of industrial arts, brought back, and a little bit of technology interwoven with that. And instead of spreading that out in a school, you put it into one space, and students come into that space and begin their project work. They would come back and forth to that space in order to keep working on their project, whatever their project was, and the teachers will be designing those projects. So, Dawn Marie just went to a conference on project-based learning, but we know that if students can build and create, they're going to remember the information that it was related to. So we're talking about still covering the same content, but in a way that helps students learn. Dawn Marie, do you want to add anything from your conference that came up with project-based learning? And that's what that room is for. And just as she's coming up, we currently have 2 computer labs. Now that computers are mobile, those classroom, that space is not going to be needed in the new school. Instead, there is this addition of an engineering lab, but it's to help with that project learning. So people think we're using more space, but actually less. So, Dawn Marie, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Hi. Just a couple of things. As we talk about project-based learning and having children explore educational curriculum areas in different ways, the thing that we're looking at when we look at this space, which we will be creating next year at Hildreth in one of the computer labs, is the idea that we have to create critical thinkers, and that is crucial for students. And so by having these spaces where we can give students a problem to solve and letting them be the critical thinkers and problem solvers, where they can navigate through and really explore some different opportunities and try things out, we're actually giving them much more than just the curriculum as it's listed. We're giving them experiences that they can then either modify or change or add to as they go through their years.
And they're not waiting for that. They're actually going to start to do that next year. And they're doing it now in classrooms, but they're actually going to dedicate space to it next year, and this building will just build on top of that. Build on top of that. Thanks for the question, Marty. Ron?
No, I was going to say, you got to quit while you're ahead.
Another good note. All right, actually, it is about time to end, but we will have people, they stood and introduced themselves, so feel free to go up to anyone and ask specific questions or get more information. And there are 3D glasses out at the table if you want to see the building in 3D. But thanks a lot for coming out tonight, and send us questions if you still have them. Thank you.